All right. Hi, everyone who is just joining us. We'll give a second for folks to come into the webcast right now. And yeah, we're so glad to have you. So let me share my screen. All right. I'm Rachel Quedno. I'm the program director at Strong Towns. And welcome to this conversation, No New Roads, Fighting an Urban Highway Expansion in Shreveport, Louisiana. We have several guests with connections to Shreveport joining us today. So Roosevelt Bryant grew up in the Allendale neighborhood of Shreveport, and he currently works at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And he also hosts the Allendale Strong podcast, which is based in Shreveport. We also have joining us LeVette Fuller, who represents District B in the Shreveport City Council. And she is a founding member of a group called Reform Shreveport. And then we have Kim Mitchell joining us. Kim is an architect, planner, civic leader, and community advocate. And he is the founding director of the Center for Community Renewal in Shreveport. And finally, Tim Wright is joining us. He is a civil engineer at Verdunity, and he is also co-founder and director of Reform Shreveport. And then this conversation is going to be hosted by Chuck Marohn, president of Strong Towns. Love it if folks would jump in the chat briefly and tell us where you're coming in from today. And as you're chatting, make sure to select panelists and attendees in that dropdown so that we all can see what you're telling us. So while everyone's sharing where they're coming from, we'll let you know that this is being recorded, and we'll send out the recording of the webcast to you after the fact in email. And then also we'll do Q&A at the end. So feel free to submit questions as we're going along here in the Q&A box if you'd like, and then we'll get to as many as we can at the end. And finally, a really brief plug. We have a new book coming out in a couple of months. This is a book by Chuck Marohn called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town. I'm guessing if you are participating in this conversation, you probably have some frustrations, to put it mildly, with the transportation system in your city, in America. And this book really lifts the lid on what's going on, why our transportation systems are so messed up, and how we can try to make them better. So encourage you to check that book out and pre-order if you're interested. All right, Chuck, I'm gonna hand it over to you and Kim and Roosevelt to kick this off.
There's an entire chapter of the book that deals with this project. And it does because I found this project to be extraordinary. I was invited by Reform Shreveport to come to Shreveport. I don't know how many years ago. It seems like 4 or 5 at this point. And I was invited to come out to this neighborhood, Allendale. And I kind of been told ahead of time that there's this project going on. But, you know, I travel around the country and I see lots of projects and I see lots of neighborhoods. And I kind of processed this and thought, okay, well, I'll go out and listen. And as I sat around the table in this place called the Friendship House, I was told about this project, this idea that we were going to spend, almost $1 billion, hundreds of millions of dollars running a highway through this neighborhood that I had just walked through, that everybody at the table with me would be dislocated and lose their homes and lose their places. And to me, it seemed, I'm just going to throw out the word. It seemed impossible to me. It seemed implausible. We don't do this kind of thing in 2015. We don't do this kind of thing in 2021. This is not something that we would do. This is really crazy. In fact, this is what we're doing, and this is the project that's in front of us. So I'd like to start, Roosevelt, with you, if I could. Roosevelt, coming at us from Georgia Tech today. Thank you for taking the time. Could you chat with us a little bit? I would like people to know a little bit about Allendale. This is where you grew up. And I'd like you to just maybe tell us a little bit about this neighborhood and why it's an important place, not just for you, but why it's an important place in Shreveport.
So yes, I grew up in Allendale. My mother grew up there. My grandmother moved there from Belcher, Louisiana, to move with my uncle, who is already there, who built this house right after World War II And that neighborhood has always been just the haven for a lot of the African Americans in that area in Shreveport. A little history about Allendale. Allendale started off as a immigrant with an immigrant population around before and after the Civil War. And from there, after the Civil War, a lot of the African Americans that were freed from slavery and also coming from Texas, like my father's grandfather's side did, they moved from Texas to Shreveport. And Allendale and St. Paul Bottoms was really just the place that you can move to. That became where everybody moved to. So from Allendale, they kind of moved from Lakeside to Queensboro and kind of moved on from there through the ages of that Shreveport had been around. But Allendale is right there next to downtown. Allendale is kind of this gateway into the downtown area, and it has always been a gateway through the downtown area ever since Shreveport had become a city. And Allendale is, to me, what the president of Allendale Strong, Ms. Dorothy Wiley, said, is that a city is only as strong as its weakest neighborhood. And right now, Allendale is one of its weakest neighborhoods. And that's why I believe that Shreveport is not strong, because Shreveport does not have that backbone of one of its, I think, weakest neighborhoods to hold it up, right? It is also the gateway into downtown. And when people are driving into downtown, not on the interstates, they come through Allendale, they come through North Market, they come through Highland, that area. And Allendale, if built up and revitalized and helped, instead of being left out like we have been for decades of not getting infrastructure fixed, streets fixed, sidewalks, things like that. Allendale can be the catalyst for the beginning of the revitalization of the inner city parts of Shreveport. And Kim Mitchell with Community Renewal, Fuller Center for Housing, saw that, understood that, and they understood that to do that, you have to put homeowners there. And that is one of the things that Community Renewal, Kim Mitchell, and Fuller Center for Housing were doing, putting homeowners in the Allendale area, because homeowners start the revitalization of the area. And highways do not pay taxes. Homeowners do. We pay property taxes. We pay, we stay there. We buy things for our homes. We fix up the neighborhood. We go to the park. So that's why I believe that Allendale is the catalyst and will be the catalyst for the beginning of Shreveport being back to its glory days of being a city on the grow. Allendale has to be a part of it. It's not a part of it, Shreveport will always be lagging behind.
Yeah. Roosevelt, I want to ask you this, having grown up there, obviously this has been a project decades and decades in the works. In fact, one of the impetuses for wanting to do this is, I hear people say, well, we've been planning this for so long, we need to do it, right? What has this done to have this project looming over the neighborhood for so long? What has this done to the people of Allendale? What has this done to their future, their prospects? I know it's hard to sell a home there, because who wants to buy into a neighborhood where this highway is going to come in? What has this done for decades now to the people of Allendale?
Well, it's killed the morale of the people of Allendale. It's given them a sense of no hope for the neighborhood, because just a overwhelming thing that a lot of people say when you go and talk to them and you say, hey, we want to help revitalize Shreveport, we want to help preserve preserve Allendale. They say, well, they're going to put a highway through, man. They're going to do it. I don't know why you guys fighting it. And that's what we get a lot of times on the Facebook page is, why are you guys even fighting it? It's not even worth it. That place is a slum. And it shows you that it kills the hope of the neighborhood, because that's all you hear from other people around the city. Everybody's telling you how bad your neighborhood is, and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, no, this is the neighborhood I grew up in. This is the neighborhood, the neighbors I grew up in, the people that I know, the memories that I have is in this neighborhood. And it just kills your morale at every turn. If you look at, I like to look at Zillow, I like to look at the tax records, I like to look at all like the history of what the housing market was doing in the Allendale area. And you can look at Zillow and look at how Shreveport is made. And in the LeVette Fuller's area where she's at, I think it's over in Holland, if I'm not mistaken. Holland, in that little area over there, that's really the only place in Shreveport that you can buy a home to over $100,000. Everything else around the area is below $100,000. And you look at Allendale, you can't even buy a house. No, the people that a lot of the slumlords, I would like to call them, don't even invest in their home. My grandmother, the guy bought my grandmother's house. He knocks on the door and tells my grandmother, I can fix up your house, but that means I'm going to charge you more in your rent. And she's thinking, okay, well, you know, what's more? And this is around 92. She was paying, I think, around $600 rent on a house that me and my cousins and everybody else would chip in and literally fix up, because the other person was a slumlord. We would fix it up. We would put down floors. We would fix windows and things like that. He said, well, I got to take it up another $600. And she was like, well, what are you going to fix? Just make it livable, right? If you can at least just make it livable, we're not doing all the fixing, replacing the toilets and replacing the plumbing, then that'd be great. Well, lo and behold, we kept having to do it because we just did not want the rent to go up. And that's the similar case that goes on through Allendale. Even if they do put any money up, they're charging more for the rent. And a lot of times you see a lot of these properties, they're just vacant lots. They don't want to invest in the neighborhood. The people that stay there, they cut their grass, they make the house livable. But if you have 5 or 6 vacant lots that nobody can buy because everybody's speculating, trying to wait until the interstate comes through, then there's no quality of life in it. So that's what's happening to us.
Kim, if I could ask you too, one of the things that I have seen a lot of, and Roosevelt referenced the Facebook page that is associated with this neighborhood and this project, and some of the other conversations that have gone on, is that this is a neighborhood not worth caring about. This is a neighborhood that, if it went away, we're going to be better off as a community in Shreveport. I suspect you have a different take on that. And I certainly have a different take, having been there and spoken to people and experienced it. This is one of the most exciting neighborhoods that I've ever been in, quite frankly. Can you talk a little bit about the Friendship House and why, basically what has gone on in this neighborhood that makes it such a special place?
Sure, I'll be glad to, Chuck. And I really appreciate your skill and observation and ability to describe your experience getting to Allendale and seeing Rosie's garden and encountering the people of what we call the Friendship House area, which is about a 30-block area of Allendale, and Allendale's about 800 to maybe 1,000 acres if you include Ledbetter Heights. But it started in 2002 is when Community Renewal took its model, which is a relational model that works across the entire city, but part of that is focused on concentrated disadvantage. And so it came to Allendale, and there's a great story of how the folks were walking the street to make friends and encountered Rosie Chaffel after Rosie had been literally in tears praying for God to send her help as she was fighting against the drug dealers and all the folks hanging down at the corner lot that she ultimately made a garden. But at that time, the police wouldn't even respond to calls in that area of Allendale. It was absolutely the most dangerous place in Shreveport. And so Community Renewal built 2 friendship houses is their strategy in these areas, put a staff person called a community coordinator to live and serve in friendship and create trust as a first step toward connecting people that live there to be neighbors. And that was the first level of changing at this part of Allendale to move from what was the most dangerous place in Shreveport to now be among the safest places in Shreveport. And there's a group of, or one aspect is called Haven House. It's a volunteer block leader strategy. And our president of Allendale Strong, Dorothy Wiley, was part of this people that came up from Katrina and worked with the Fuller Center and Community Renewal to build and own their own home. So there's about 52 homeowners that are now in that Friendship House area. And it was a night in February 2012 when I was asked to come and meet with a group of these block leaders. And they were what really at a point that Roosevelt described, feeling, you could see the hopelessness on their face. They had been part of what I call creating a miracle. They had taken this place from danger to safety. They had created hope because they had a sense of community, not just a home, but a real sense of community that they had created in partnership with Community Renewal and Fuller Center. And now they were facing the power structure of our MPO telling them that they were going to run over them. And so it's my view as an architect and a planner, I'm saying, okay, here's a miracle that really needs to be shared with the country. I'm not aware of any housing community neighborhood renewal process that was done in this way. And it really can be done more and more places to focus on relationships, put people in housing that is truly affordable, privately funded, and it truly is a miracle. And so here they are after all that work, and I guess around 2012, feeling like we've done this, and now the reward is we're going to be run over by the power structure of Shreveport. And that night we met. It's a seminal point for me because Chuck, you're an expert, more accomplished in many ways than I am. But I went in, and I thought, well, I'm here to tell them the roadway's not inevitable, but the process is designed to wear out any resistance. And before I spoke, I listened to the group that night, and the depth of their understanding was just very moving. And we made an agreement that night that if the neighborhood would form a learning community to take on this, that we start with our relationships, that's all we got, then I would serve as their planner advocate. That's just a term I made up because the power structure, everything's on the side of the opposition. And literally the only thing Allendale residents started with was their relationships. And so we've grown in a lot of different ways since 2012, but the folks involved are taking on the freeway, but they're full of hope. And their hope is taking them to forming a food cooperative, to renewing the park, the neighborhood park that the city has tried to unpark so that it's not an obstacle to the freeway. And they're really now preparing Chuck for winning and then taking on the leadership role in incremental development coming out of strong towns, but really what is their role in owning and guiding the renewal of the neighborhood?
This is what I wanted to ask you as a follow-up, because I found this neighborhood to be, and starting with the people, as you suggest, some of the most innovative, exciting, just generous people to be around. If the highway project were to end today, and I wrote an article for CNN calling on the transportation secretary to say the interstate's done, it's built, we're not going to do this project ever, it's done, it's over. What would happen to this neighborhood? What would be, what's the vision for what would come next here?
Well, Roosevelt mentioned really a slogan that we're thinking about that can motivate us, which is Shreveport's only as strong as its weakest neighborhood. And so if we start with that, and then we learn into it, or we call it a learning doing community, into who's willing in Allendale to grow into the leadership for renewal of this neighborhood. How do we, because this is not really done anywhere, that we start with the folks that live there and grow their capacity to lead and participate in the the renewal of the neighborhood. So that's like a frontier for us. And I appreciate you seeing the innovation in the group, because it really is amazing how, and I don't know when this happened, but the neighborhood group became trusted throughout the city as a source of good information. And we still struggle, and it's very discouraging to see the misinformation campaign coming out of the the flawed assumptions that really drive the whole industrial complex of building freeways.
Right, right. Roosevelt, if I could go back to you just for a second, you have chosen to stay involved here. You're at Georgia Tech now. You're not living in Allendale. You've, in a sense, kind of moved on a little bit. You have a very successful professional career in IT. Why? Why are you still involved? Why do you care? Why are you doing this podcast, Allendale Strong? Why? What is it?
My mother still stays in the Allendale area. And I've stayed in many different Columbus, Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, many different mid-sized cities in the South. And I started reading around. One of the things that got me into looking at other mid-sized cities in the South was staying in Augusta, Georgia, and seeing how they did things there, and how Augusta, Georgia did not have an interstate that went through the city. And it kind of went halfway through, but the major part of Augusta, you actually had to get on the little bypass to go to. And I kind of saw how a lot of the mid-sized cities that I went to, from Knoxville, Tennessee, to Montgomery, Alabama, to Mobile, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi. Well, Jackson's kind of bigger than Shreveport, but I started observing what they were doing. What was Tulsa doing? What was Oklahoma City doing? Why are they so successful on doing this? And what did they do to overcome that? And I started to see that a lot of the mid-sized cities in the South have some of the same problems. And it's just kind of, they're trying to rebuild their towns. I always say mid-sized cities about 10 to 15 years behind what other major cities is, and major cities in the South are 5 years behind what other major cities in the world are doing. So my interest peaked then, and then with my mother being in Allendale, and then me hearing about what they were doing at Shreveport Park, that is what made me want to step out and try to help out and get the word out of what they were doing. I grew up around a lot of, I go to church with, on one end, Willie Bradford, who was really pushing for it. And on the next end, the same person, Rosie goes to the same church as him. We all went to Lane Chapel CME Church in Allendale. So that dynamic of the person that's really pushing it and the person that's trying to save her home, all go to the same church. It kind of shows you how close we are in that regard, to Allendale. Yeah. And it shows you that we have two different views of what Allendale can become. Rosie represents hope, and Willie, I love him. He's a part of our close friend and family, but he kind of represents this old view of just build a highway through the slum and then we'll work it out afterwards. So that's what brought me in. That's what just my overall view of what was going on, and the hope and the dream and the vision that I know that Allendale can live up to, because Allendale is, like I always, Allendale is right there. It has a very rich history, which we're going to go through in one of our podcast episodes to talk about the rich immigrant history of Allendale, the rich history with, the first Black lieutenant governor of Louisiana, being stayed in the Allendale area. Just the whole history and makeup of the neighborhood is so vibrant, and I believe that it needs to be celebrated. These neighborhoods from Allendale and Shreveport to Laney Walker in Augusta, Georgia, to in Macon, I forgot the Black area in Macon, to Africatown and Mobile, These places need to be celebrated. Places need to be looked upon as with their history and what they brought. But we need to understand how they got to that point with redlining, how they got to that point with the FHA not insuring loans, how they got to that point with the Montgomery GI Bill only being given to soldiers or people that fought in the war to stay in these areas where they could not get loans unless they were over 45% interest rates. So that's why I came back. That's why I did this. And it every time I go home, I see it. Every time I sit on Passman Street right there by Spoke Hill Park and I look and I can see the downtown area and I can see where we used to stand there and watch the 4th of July fireworks and where we used to celebrate for Juneteenth. That is the memory I have. That's the memory I want other kids to have that go to Booker T. Washington, Ingersoll, Lakeside. I want them to have that same feeling of what Allendale gave me. So that's why I do what I do.
Thank you. I want everybody to hear that. And I'm inspired by you, Roosevelt. I listen to your podcast. I hope you know it's, I'm with you. So let me ask Kim, let me ask you one last question real quick before we switch over and bring in Tim and LeVette. I know there's a statewide coalition being put together here. Can you talk about the significance? I feel like a big part of what has made Allendale such a special place is this internal bond, but that internal bond now is giving you kind of a strength to reach out and create some of these external links too. Can you talk a little bit about this broader coalition and what we're trying to accomplish with that?
Well, we in our study and learning, we began to see that other cities are experiencing the same thing that Allendale is, and that there are small groups in not just in Louisiana, but across the South and the country that are essentially fighting the same battle. And so we've been wanting to reach out, and then one of our advisor members, John Perkins, connected with Amy Stelly in New Orleans. And Amy liked the idea, and she reached out to Lafayette, and then Allendale Strong convened this statewide group that includes Monroe, New Orleans, Lafayette, and Shreveport. So we called it the Four Corners. And, it's continuing our learning. And we're hopeful, and that group is really about policy change. We've learned that even with Secretary Buttigieg announcing a philosophical change, that the structure of the system is not really going to change without intervention at the state level. We've kind of learned that through now being part of the freeway fighters with the Congress of New Urbanism. And so our group is really digging in to how can we do this? So we've had 3 meetings, and so we're still trying to reach out and network to our networks to see how can we build some movement toward taking steps that lead to policy change and practices change in Louisiana, including Allendale Strong has hired Norm Marshall, who's I knew that you did. He's written for Strong Towns, but Norm is he's done some podcasts with us on Roosevelt's podcast. And then he's helped us request transportation demand files and is ready to bring his what he's been teaching us about to expose the flaws in the whole calculation system. We kind of take an attitude, our leaders are just being taken advantage of. They're operating with faulty information. You've done a great job of helping us dispel some of that too with the articles that took apart their justification report. And so it's a journey, and it's extremely frustrating to try to figure out where to push the system to get some different outcomes. And all the time they keep throwing money, which as they throw money, our leadership could eventually end up finding a way to fund this ridiculous project. So
Let me, I want to bring in Tim here. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Roosevelt. One of the things that has really blown my mind about this project is the funding part of it. 700 million, $700 million, approaching $1 billion was the last number I saw, but I think it's a higher number now. Can you're a civil engineer, you do all kinds of municipal projects, in Texas and Louisiana. What is $700 million? I mean, how can we wrap our minds around this? You're doing road projects that are significant projects that are $500,000, $750,000. This is an astounding number, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, you could probably do half of the city with that amount of money.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and just to, a lot of these big highway expansions, it's just the massive amounts of money it takes to construct these it's expensive in the short term, and on the back end, in the long term, it's going to be very expensive as well. I was spending some time combing through some Louisiana state budget documents from our Department of Transportation over the last couple of days, and you just kind of see the impacts that this mindset of always wanting to expand kind of gets you financially. There's just a lot of debt that the state is having to take on through a lot of projects like this. I was looking at one program that happened over the span of, it started about 1990, and it lasted about 20 years. It was a $5 billion project, and I've driven on a lot of these roads, and they're nice, and there's a beautiful bridge near Baton Rouge over the Mississippi River that I was just like, wow, this is incredible. But then you go and look at the financing, and the gas tax that was used to pay for that program has not caught up, and now they're having to dig into the other gas tax revenue to help make up that gap. And so personally, when you look at the funding, it's it just kind of paints a picture of what some of these mega projects do, and you have to be really smart. I think there's certainly a need for big infrastructure projects at certain points in time and places, but you really have to weigh the positives and negatives. I think Roosevelt and Kim did a great job of talking about the social and neighborhood level implications, but we live in a state that people are very hesitant to raise the gasoline tax, and it came up a couple of years ago, just because they see these deteriorating roads all over the state. And meanwhile, we're kind of trying to build the next big thing instead of focusing on maintaining what we've got. And I think it's just kind of a downward spiral. And so that's kind of what I think of when I look at some of the big cost numbers for a project like this.
What about the people who say, most of this money is coming from the federal government. If we don't do this project, that money's just going to go somewhere else, and we're going to lose it. So we might as well do this project. What's kind of your response to that line of thinking?
Well, it's true. Like the budget documents that I was looking at, like Louisiana, because our funding situation is not that great. We literally are losing money to other states because we can't put up the local match. And I would just say, let's try and turn that around, but let's do it on some roads that are already in existence to kind of keep those up. That's true. If you don't have the match, then the money does go to other states. But I think there are smarter ways to spend that money.
When I got the economic analyses, the documents that I've written kind of extensively about it, and included in the book that I've got coming up here, a couple of things that blew me away was that the economic people, and this is not the engineering people, but I think the numbers cross correlate. We're literally projecting 250 or 60 or something like that through trips a day. They were also looking at commuters, and they were projecting somewhere around 3,600 people, 3,600 commuting trips a day. Again, we throw numbers around, 700 million, this many trips, that many things. And I think people who are non-numerical people, their eyes glaze over. but I mean, I know of alleys in cities that get more than 250 cars a day. I mean, this is a bizarre small number of trips for a bizarre large sum of money. Is that how you're seeing this as well?
Yeah, I mean, with any project, you've really got to look at, you've got to look at, you do have to look at those numbers and figure out if it's worth it. I mean, some of our busiest roads in Shreveport, if anyone on the call is familiar, Uri Drive and 70th Street. I mean, some of those state highways in certain parts of our city get, probably 30 or 40,000 trips a day. And, that's what, fast food restaurants and all that look to kind of decide where to place some of their buildings. And so, I mean, if you're talking about 3,600 trips, that's not a lot of cars. So, I mean, again, you really have to dig deep, and you have to think about, okay, like what's the reasoning, and really dig deep and ask the right questions to whatever road project it is. There's a lot of arguments that say, well, you need a north-south and you need an east-west, thoroughfare. It's like, okay, like that's a great kind of philosophical, thought that you have, but you really have to dig in to the numbers and make sure that it's a good financial investment. And if it's not, then you're just digging yourself further into a hole.
One of the things I've always appreciated about you, and of course appreciate about Verdunity, the firm that you work in, is this willingness to kind of step outside of the traditional engineering mindset. I feel like our colleagues in the engineering profession would say, we need to do this project because it was put on a map in the 1950s. It's part of the interstate system. We have to complete this system. There's almost like a subroutine that is running that has to work its way through. How do you feel about the kind of calls to basically end the interstate system, or say, it's built, let's move on, and these few remaining segments maybe weren't that important in the first place?
I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think there certainly could be, there could be new cities that pop up that maybe you need to build, a section of freeway. I mean, Shreveport is another great example. I mean, there's an interstate that was built, north of us. It's Interstate 49. It's just the part through the rural areas. And I mean, I think something like that can be, I haven't run the numbers on it, but I mean, I use that to visit friends in Hot Springs and all that. But I mean, I think in general, we've reached our capacity, and we need to figure out, new ways to build our cities, because I mean, it's pretty easy to get, places, but I think, I know you've used the words kind of like thicken up our communities. I think it's a very challenging way to move forward. It's much more challenging, I think, than just slapping a 4-lane highway somewhere, but I think it's the right thing to do, and just to really get into those complex details.
Let me ask LeVette to join us. LeVette, first of all, for those of you that are keeping score, LeVette wrote the afterword of my book. So the first book, Strong Town. So if you've read that, you've read LeVette's writing. I'm so grateful. And she's on our advisory board. She's one of my bosses. So it's so nice for you to be here with us, LeVette. I want people to get an understanding of what it's like to be on a city council in a city like Shreveport, because I think there's this mindset that a lot of us have, that if you're on the city council, you have the authority to kind of step up and stop a project like this. And you can just do a vote and it's all over. And why is this continuing on? Can you talk just a little bit about maybe the frustration of being in elected office and not being able to sometimes stop this federal process and this state process and all these other forces working for you?
Well, sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first thing with this is that it's a matter of the state matching funds and the federal funds. So that's going to be our state legislature, and our local delegation fighting for those funds, and for the most part, they do. So we don't have necessarily any say or influence over that. Not legitimate influence over how they handle that process. We can be vocal, but there's a price to pay when you're vocal about it. Just having the wrong opinion in the eyes of people who have a major sphere of influence and a lot of funding, it's a very hot button third rail place to be. The mayor does have some say. He's on the MOU for the region. The MPO. Okay, more coffee, please. The MPO for the, so that's several parishes that basically get to vote over how funding and studies and planning are set out for major transportation. And I've watched our current mayor sort of sidestep conversation as a federal and state issue, that without regard to the fact that he's a voting member of NLCOG, which is going to determine how funds are spent for a lot of these big projects. It's squirmy. It's kind of hard to want to be able to influence things and want to be able to speak to people and get them to consider a different way of viewing this project. From my seat as a city council person who doesn't actually get to leverage a vote on this, the most we would do would be a ceremonial vote as a resolution saying we are in agreement that we want this to happen sooner than later, and we can take a vote on it. And that's just kind of a, let's see whose team you're on kind of a vote. Right. But beyond that, just in the big picture for me personally, there was a recall against me a year ago for standing up to another boondoggle project. It didn't go very far, but people were so frustrated that I wasn't taking a mainstream view about a project that was going to speed up decay and decline rather than, and be a very expensive boondoggle rather than being for that. I want to see us actually revitalize existing neighborhoods. And so a recall effort started against me. And so I guess if I had any sense, I'd just stop talking, but I don't have any sense. I tell everyone that on a regular basis.
That's why we love you. People, we're going to get to questions in a minute. So I've seen people start to add questions to the Q&A. I encourage you to do that. LeVette, I really want to get to this idea of trying to do your job and represent people and be a conscientious local city council member in a situation where this really catastrophic amount of money is kind of dividing the community. You have this committee of 100, which I'm guessing the state legislative delegation listens to more than, a friendly council member representing real people in a real district. How does this kind of make governing or make doing your job, the fact that there's this huge project and this huge amount of money, how's it separating people? How's it making it difficult to do even normal things that I think could bring people together on?
The day-to-day isn't too bad, but it's not often you can have a conversation with someone whose mind is malleable about this particular situation. I once sat down with several members of the local Chamber of Commerce board, and one of those people, if you follow Allendale Strong, you'll see the memes about Sound Panel Patrick. And something about I-49 came up, which was inevitable. And it's just like me on the hot seat over coffee with this group having a casual conversation. And I said, okay, I'm not going to have an argument with you about doing this or not doing this. Let's talk about how. What does it actually look like? If you can be told, here are all of the issues that we need to mitigate, be it the displacement, the loss of historic churches, the environmental impacts, the noise, the pollution, the litter, everything that goes along with an elevated highway, just using so much space, not just the length to connect it, but the width, the on-ramps and off-ramps, all of these things. If you take into account everything that you need to mitigate to do this, quote unquote, right, how much more is it really going to be? And it was like like if you play Sims, when like your Sims character runs out of fuel and just kind of melts down and goes crazy, it was like that. He's just like, he could not fathom that there was anything to do other than have a tug of war over the issue, like a tug of war argument over actually having like a real visceral conversation over the dollars and cents and the impact. That's what it's like. It's emotional. It's an emotional conversation. It's not rational. And what's interesting there is I am a self-proclaimed progressive. I don't do well with the word liberal. I'm a very bad Democrat, but I consider myself a progressive. In a room with a lot of conservative Republican or conservative business-minded Republicans who say that they are fiscally conservative and admire that I'm somewhat of a fiscal hawk and probably the most fiscally conservative person on our council. So they hear me on right-wing radio and they're like, yeah, we like this part of her. We know she's a liberal, but this is cool. So when you get into a conversation with people who identify as fiscally conservative and they can't understand the problem that I have with the numbers, and they just kind of melt down, it's frustrating. But the next step is field of dreams, magical thinking that building this highway is going to create all of these other opportunities, that we're going to see so much more economic development. All of this industry is going to want to come here, and they still don't play out that narrative. Okay, so what kind of industry do you believe highways are going to bring? What kind of jobs are these? Distribution jobs? Okay, so rather than have a vibrant neighborhood that is already set up to have a beautiful urban, like the urban skeleton is already there. Like there are parts of Allendale where you can walk around and feel like you could be in Brooklyn or any other cool urban area where a kid can get off the school bus, stop and see the little dude at the corner store, get an ice cream cone, go play baseball or basketball in the park, and then go home all in the stretch of a couple of blocks and have this kind of sense of community and eyes on the street. It's already there. All you have to do is build it up. And then you get the tax revenue and the vibrancy from that, but you would rather replace all of that right next to your downtown with a highway and huge warehouses and all of the other like major impacts that are negative. It's a bad vision. It's a hard vision for me. And I don't think that when people are saying we believe that we're going to get these other attributes, that they don't see that those aren't attributes. And the other part of that is this is drive over country, not live in country. This isn't bringing people to, it's bringing people over, not even through. It's an elevated piece of highway, 3 miles of it. This is bringing people past it. This is to get people from South Shreveport, very affluent area. This is to take them on their girls' trips to Fayetteville and Bentonville, Arkansas. This is to bypass for other areas that, guess what? Connect by I-49, but I-49 doesn't go anywhere near the major parts of their city. The parts of the areas that they're going to leave Shreveport for vacation for a weekend, and I say that because I just did it. We took I-49 and we have to drive through Texarkana. You see no part of Texarkana. And Texarkana is growing. And we drive north and you're off of it, you're on 71 for a while, then you get back on it at Fayetteville, and no part of what makes Fayetteville special can you see from the highway. And then you do Bentonville and it's exactly the same way. But we're going to take an area with the same kind of capacity for charm and vibrancy and put a highway through it. and replace everything around it with factories, possibly. It's just a bad vision for me, and it's difficult that that visual that I gave you can't even be achieved in a dialogue because it's such a hot button, and the people who want what they want, in their defense, are so accustomed to Shreveport not finishing things that it feels like Lucy in the football. And they're so desperate to see something just get done because they think that it will at least let their personal morale increase. That's why they're so, if they're not profiting for it, their reason for championing it is that we want to kick that football and finally win against Lucy because we're tired of not finishing anything.
I want to ask one last question. I saw Rachel pop up here. I know we're going to get to Q&A. This has just been so good. I want to ask you and Tim both one last question together. And I don't care which one of you wants to go here, but when you're talking about finishing and Lucy and the football, Reform Shreveport is a different vision of this. And in some ways it's a little bit, it's a little bit dissatisfying because it's an acknowledgement that we are going to continually work on this thing, as opposed to have like one just big thing that fixes it all. How much momentum have you seen with Reform Shreveport since this was founded? And talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've done a lot of projects. I mean, I think in short, it's just the acknowledgement that we need to go step by step and find some solutions and, build upon that. I think one of my, just the most personal kind of connection to these kind of efforts to rebuild communities. I feel so grateful, when I've, met some people in Allendale, or we've been doing another project recently that's south of there. And, I think these communities, like all communities, really have just such a great kind of interconnect of all the, there's all these churches and residents that really care. But I think there's, if certain people look at the neighborhood and they just see no hope. And I really think that, it's founded, what we've been doing is founded upon like, okay, there are concrete ways that we can build up communities. And I mean, the hard part is a lot of times there isn't a plan, and sometimes it drives me crazy as an engineer. And I know LeVette sees that sometimes, but it's like, there is something really freeing about just finding that next best step and working from there. And for me, that's really at the core of what we're doing. And yeah, it's hard, but you really do have to dig deep and see a vision and just go from there, go step by step.
I'm going to invite Roosevelt and Kim to come back on. LeVette, you want to take that just for a sec? And then we'll switch to Rachel.
I'll try not to be long-winded this time. We have people, I hear in MPC meetings when they're discussing like an annexation, I'll hear the things that we've been saying for the last several years with Reform Shreveport. I'm hearing it told back to me like they had no idea that we were the ones that were engaging at first. That part feels pretty good. Like it's catching on. We're starting to hear it in rooms of influence, and that gives me like on the concept side more than the project side, which is still really good. But on the concept side, it's giving me a little bit of hope occasionally. We're at least getting a little traction.
All right, Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. So we have a question here from Matthew Holland, who asks, a couple folks mentioned the issue of federal funding for these new projects that are focusing on new projects rather than improving existing roads. I feel like maybe this question can go for Tim, LeVette, anybody really. Do you foresee a shift in policy at the federal level that's going to prioritize improving urban infrastructure over expanding interstate stuff and highways? Anybody want to have a take on that?
I mean, I would say there's definitely grassroots efforts to go that direction. And I know that the current administration has definitely been emphasizing that. I don't know, there's just a whole lot of inertia the opposite direction though. And I think that's going to be tough to overcome, but I mean, I think it just requires more education, and I think we can get there, but still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I just foresee it, on the federal level, as soon as an administrative leave, another administration come in and they change everything. All right. And you can look at Anthony Fox, to when Trump took over, and now with people to judge. It's like, it's back and forth. It's like, so I think unless, and Tim was correct, unless we have a grassroots effort that goes on both sides of the aisle, then that's when you're going to start seeing a change, right? I always say, once you take, 2 steps forward on a federal level, as soon as the new administration comes in, you take 3 steps back, right? And now you have to learn to either take 3 steps to get back to where you were, or take 4 steps to progress. So that's kind of the way you see it. And unless you have a consistent policy that stays there for, I think, for at least 3 or 4 presidential cycles, and that's, I think it's gonna take hold. But as long as we keep going back and forth, then it's gonna be the same, I believe.
Yeah. Rachel, recently heard Beth Osborne of Transportation for America, who's from New Orleans, by the way, and she's been in the transportation bureaucracy for a long time, and was describing the problem of change at the federal level, that it's very difficult. Entrenched bureaucrats just kind of wait out whoever brings the latest new direction, and then they just keep going. And she framed that the big challenge is at the state level, that the feds can set some policy direction, but the entrenched thinking at state DOT levels is where the real challenge is. And we saw this recently. And I think of it this way: Louisiana has about $1.1 billion every year to spend from state DOT, from the state and federal gas tax. And nobody's asking the question, how do we have a system that we can operate within that amount of money? We've obviously built too much, because we have a $30 billion backlog, about 15 billion of maintenance and 15 billion of new mega projects. And so with the current mindset, the state starts stealing money from other state coffers. I-49 is stolen, I'm going to use that term, they wouldn't accept that, but from the unclaimed property fund, to the tune of about $15 million a year. They obligate the state debt to pay back if anybody claims that unclaimed property. From the BP settlement fund, they took $100 million of $700 million that they don't have. That's flowing over about a 25-year period, I think. And they put that toward I-49 inner city. And then this last legislative session, the Chambers of Commerce and the Committee of 100 types across the state got through legislation that will move sales tax revenue on automobiles from the general fund, where it can go to healthcare and education and other things, to transportation. And they went so far as to say that generates about 300 million a year. And so 75% of that 300 million is going to new highway mega projects, only 25% to renovation or to maintenance. So, that's why I think our coalition could be important if we can figure that out at the state level. And, we've got to do something to change the mindsets of our leaders, and then all of the practices and policies that are just based on flawed assumptions.
LeVette, and then I'm going to get some contact stuff for all of you, but go ahead, LeVette.
If you can't change the mindset, then throw the elephant. It's time for some new leadership. It's time for younger leadership that's not so obsessed with cars and petroleum. Start electing people that ride bicycles. I need to get on my bicycle.
Amen.
I love you, LeVette. I want people to be able to follow all of you. As we've been going along here, the people who are live on the webcast have gotten a stream from Rachel, who's awesome, of all these links. and we're going to put those in the show notes when we release this as in the podcast and everything else. But just for people who are listening, Roosevelt, what's the name of your podcast, and where can people get a hold of that?
So our name of our podcast is the Allendale Strong Podcast. You can check us out on YouTube or anywhere that you check out podcasts. We actually, I'm gonna have a upload. They had a little technical problem getting the podcast out on Buzzsprout, but we're gonna have a big push probably this weekend of all of the other podcasts that we've done, so to fill up that list. And like I said, you can check us out on YouTube. You can check us on anywhere that you get podcasts, and you can also go to the Facebook page, Allendale Strong Facebook page. And sometimes we will post up little shorts and things like that on that Facebook page.
Awesome. Kim, if people want to learn more about your work, Friendship House, all these things, what's the best place to do that?
At communityrenewal.us, and that'll take you to our website, and you can learn about that model that we are replicating around the country and even in Africa.
Yeah, fantastic. Tim, go ahead, Kim.
I did want to say we have a new website for Allendale Strong too.
Oh, please.
And our PR person, Danielle Richard, is watching us today, but it's allendalestrong.org, and you can keep up with our activities that way.
Fantastic. Tim, Verdunity, everyone knows where to get a hold of you there who's listening. How about Reform Shreveport? Is there anything we can plug people into with either of those two?
Yeah, our website is reformshreveport.com, and you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Fantastic. And LeVette, if people want to follow you, because I know they do, what's the best place to do that? You've got to unmute though.
No, it wouldn't do. I probably Instagram, LeVette F, LeVettef. LeVette Fuller at Twitter. I'm at LeVette Fuller. And the website that I rarely ever update is LeVetteFuller.com.
Fantastic. Rachel?
Yep, just dropped all those links for everyone, and we're going to send out an email with all this as well to everyone who's here. So thanks for joining us, and I will also do one last mention of the book. As Kim was reminding me, there's a whole section on this I-49 issue in the Confessions of a Recovering Engineer book as well, if you want to read further. So thanks everyone for joining us. Kim, LeVette, Tim, Roosevelt, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom as part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
All right, take care.